Welcome all of you to this course on 1 and 2 dimensional NMR spectroscopy. I am Professor Surya Prakash from NMR Research Center, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. So, you go to any part of the world now, or any good chemistry laboratory, it is hard to find a person who does not use NMR spectroscopy or who is not familiar with NMR spectroscopy. So NMR spectroscopy is a very powerful technique. It was discovered sometime in the middle of the last century. In a short span of nearly 60 or 70 years, now it is one of the indispensable analytical technique. The question is, what makes NMR spectroscopy a powerful technique? First thing, NMR is a non-invasive and non-destructive technique. You can investigate your samples without destroying them. And it is possible for us to study very weak interactions surrounding the nucleus. Any microscopic perturbation because of an electronic charge distribution at the site of the nucleus can easily be investigated. Now, if you go to the periodic table, there are more than 110 elements you can find. But at least one element or one isotope of an element in the entire periodic table is NMR active. That means every element of the periodic table or at least one of its isotopes is NMR active. It means you can study varieties of chemical and biological molecules and even materials. Every molecule, every material, whether it is chemical or biological, can be investigated. And another thing is, interestingly, each and every NMR active element of the periodic table can be individually investigated. That is important, can be individually investigated. And what can you get out of it? You can get structural, conformational information in all the three phases of matter. Now you can study molecules by NMR spectroscopy in the solution state, in the solid state, and also in the gaseous state. Of course, there is another wing where NMR spectroscopy is also studied in an intermediate state between liquids and solids called liquid crystalline phase, where you can dope your molecule or partially align your molecule in an anisotropic environment by doping them in medium like liquid crystal, and you can investigate. That means it is possible to investigate your molecules in solids, liquids, gaseous, and also in the liquid crystalline phase. Nevertheless, presently I can tell you NMR is widely used to study molecules in solution and solid state. Of course, there is lot of investigations going on, studies are going on. By aligning the molecule, we get what are called residual dipolar coupling. That is similar to what I said, investigations in liquid crystalline media. That is also going on. Another interesting information that you can get as far as your molecules are concerned is the dynamics. If the dynamics are going on in your molecule, you can get it, you can investigate over different time scales. The molecular dynamics can vary from picoseconds to seconds. It can also be investigated. That is the important point. So that's why NMR is now a very, very powerful technique. Let us see how NMR developed in the last 6 or 7 decades. Though it became very powerful in late 70s, 80s onwards, but let us see historically how it developed. So I'm going to give you some historical perspectives as far as the timeline of developments of NMR spectroscopy is concerned. It is good to have some ideas about how things evolve in science when a powerful technique like this has to become so powerful and developed to this level. First, let us see understanding of the magnetism. It's one of the important concepts. You require magnetism. You should know magnetism in NMR spectroscopy. If you want to understand NMR, you should have some idea about magnetism. The concept, the understanding of this was known sometime in the late 19th century. Second, discovery of what is called nuclear magnetic moment. It is the famous Stern-Gerlach experiment which took place in the year 1920 and for which he was awarded Nobel Prize in the year 1943. Remember, this is the beginning where nuclear magnetic moment was discovered. Then real discovery of NMR, I can say, started in the year 1940. Okay, by Rabi's experiment. I won't say 1944 because he was given Nobel Prize in 1944, but he observed NMR by what is called molecular beam experiment in gas phase. That is the famous Rabi's experiment. Okay, he observed NMR using molecular beam experiment in the gas phase, for which he was awarded Nobel Prize in the year 1944. And the first observation of NMR in water and in paraffin wax was done by Felix Bloch and Edward Purcell in 1946. Both of them observed NMR signals simultaneously and independently. And both of them were jointly awarded Nobel Prize in Physics in the year 1952. Now, of course, exploration in NMR spectroscopy started going further, and in the year 1949, chemical shift was discovered. That was really that transformed the way NMR spectroscopy is what it is today. The discovery of chemical shift is the most important thing in NMR. Without discovery of chemical shift, NMR would not have been what it is today. That is very important discovery. And soon in 1950s, in the year 1953, first commercial spectrometer was made available. And late 1950s onwards, 50s onwards, magic angle spinning was introduced for study this solids, where you can study NMR spectroscopy in the solid state. Of course, many interesting parameters and important concepts were developed in late 60s and 70s, like J coupling, nuclear over-Raser effect, Hanekov, decoupling, cross polarization, and most importantly, introduction of a mathematical tool called Fourier transformation in NMR. These were marvelous discoveries which found enormous utility. And in 1970s, another dimension was added to NMR spectroscopy, where NMR rebirth happened. That is called two-dimensional NMR. Another dimension was introduced, two-dimensional NMR started in 1970s. And 80s onwards, number of pulse sequences were designed, both two-dimensional and three-dimensional, for diverse experiments to extract spectral information in an orchestrated manner. It really literally took off in 80s. So, multi-dimensional NMR, MRI, and functional imaging, they started emerging. And people were able to get structures of proteins, three-dimensional structures of proteins. And for all these things, remember what happened. In the year 1991, Nobel Prize was conferred for Professor Richard Ernst for chemistry for the development of high-resolution NMR methods. In the year 2002, Kurt Wittrich was given Nobel Prize in chemistry for three-dimensional structure of biomolecules. And in 2003, Nobel Prize was awarded to jointly for Paul Lauterbach, sorry, they mistaken it is Lauterbach, and Peter Mansfield for the discoveries concerning MRI. Now, in the year 2020 onwards, more than 1 gigahertz commercial spectrometer is available for routine utility. See how NMR evolved in just 60 or 70 years. Most interesting thing you must notice is, first NMR was discovered by physicists. Nobel Prize was given jointly for Felix Bloch and Purcell for physics in 52. Then it was taken over by chemists. Till then it was in the realm of physics, taken over by chemists, and afterwards it was taken over by biologists. You see, you are able to get biomolecular structure, three-dimensional biomacromolecules can be studied. And then it moved on to medicine. See, it started with physics, chemistry, biology, and medicine. It is covering various branches of science. Okay, that's how NMR spectroscopy evolved, and today it is a ubiquitous technique. And just, of course, if anybody is offering a course on NMR spectroscopy, they cannot avoid showing the Nobel laureates who are pioneers of this field. This is Felix Bloch, Edward Purcell, who are awarded Nobel Prize for physics, for the discovery of NMR in physics. Richard Ernst, Nobel laureate in chemistry in 1991. Kurt Wittrich, Nobel laureate in 2002 in chemistry. Paul Lauterbach and Peter Mansfield, who were given Nobel Prize in medicine in the year 2003 for their work concerning MRI. And now with this, let us see the utility of NMR in various branches of science. As I said, NMR is an ubiquitous technique. It's a technique which is very powerful and used in various branches of science. Here I am going to show you, or I am showing you only the bird's eye view of different science or different branches in science where NMR is utilized. But there are many apart from this. This is not the end. This is not the only thing. There are many other things which I am not able to put in this slide. We can see NMR is exploited in agricultural field, medicine, in hospitals where MRI is a very powerful technique now. Functional imaging, you can study functional imaging, what is happening in your brain. In airports for detection of explosives, in unconventional application like this, in well logging, in vivo spectroscopy, NMR microscopy, you can study intact animals. It is exploited more even in food technology and material science, which is another branch. Enormous work is going on. And of course, structural chemistry and structural biology, right from the discovery of chemical shifts, it is very well utilized. And a lot of work is going on in these areas. It is used in forensic science, physics, soil science. Look, these are all only the tip of an iceberg. And it is today is such a powerful technique and ubiquitous technique. Every, not only science, every branch of engineering, in many branches of engineering, people are using NMR. Okay. With this, let me ask you the question, or we can ask ourselves, what NMR can do for chemists and biologists? Of course, structural elucidation, that is natural product chemistry and synthetic organic chemistry. What do chemists do? They extract products, they get natural products, or synthesize the molecules in laboratory, and they want to get the structure. They want to elucidate the structure. NMR can give that. If you want to study dynamic processes like reaction kinetics, if you want to study chemical structural equilibrium, that is possible to study. And of course, biomolecular structure determination of proteins, nucleic acids, and polysaccharides. It is routinely practiced now. Drug design, we can study structure activity relationship, and of course in MRI, as I said, medicine, MRI, metabolomics, where you can study biofluids, cells, and tissues. Varieties of things can be done. And NMR is very, very useful nowadays for chemists and also biologists. So with this, it is good to understand something about concepts of NMR spectroscopy before we take a deep plunge into techniques of 1 and 2 dimensional NMR. Conceptual understanding. First, let us see. This is an electromagnetic spectrum. You can see various frequency ranges are given here. For example, gamma rays, X-rays, both soft and hard, ultraviolet is a visible range, infrared, of course UV also is here, infrared, microwave, and this is radio frequency range. Okay, this is the radio frequency range. And of course you can see it is given in the frequency scale and also in wavelengths. As you go from left to right, this is low frequency region, radio frequency is a low frequency region, and as you go towards gamma rays, the frequency is increasing. It is a high frequency region. If you come back from right to left, of course it is a wavelength. See, here wavelength is lower because frequency is higher. When you come to radio frequency region, the wavelength is larger. So it is in the meters here. Wavelength is in meters. Okay, so this is the range where you can see in the pictorially what are the things you can study in different spectroscope branches of spectroscopy. You can study varieties of phenomena happening in molecules like rotations, vibrations, electronic transitions. Varieties of things can be studied. By using X-ray, you can get crystal structures, etc. Now the question is, where does NMR come in this electromagnetic spectrum? Electron in this electromagnetic spectrum, NMR appears in radio frequency region. Remember, NMR appears in the radio frequency region of the electromagnetic spectrum. With this, we will now try to understand something about spin angular momentum and magnetic moment. These are the two terms which very often, extensively, we will be using in NMR. If anybody is talking about NMR, they cannot avoid using these terms like spin angular momentum and magnetic moment. So let us understand what they are. Of course, when we have to discuss about angular momentum, most of you would be knowing, if you have a rotating object possesses angular momentum. What type of angular momentum? You can have varieties of angular momentum. For example, you can see rotational angular momentum of an atom or a molecule. You can also see, you can also find orbital angular momentum of electrons. We have spin angular momentum of electron. We have spin angular momentum of nucleus. I mean, just I'm giving you one or two examples. Okay, this is not the exhaustive thing I'm listing. Before we see, of course, I said spin angular momentum of the nucleus. That's what we have to understand. Before we go into the nucleus, let us see the spin angular momentum of subatomic particles like proton, neutron, and electron. They have properties like this, which are listed here. Proton has a positive charge. Its spin angular momentum is half. Neutron charge is 0. It has a spin angular momentum of half. Electron has a negative charge with a spin angular momentum of half. Of course, it is all expressed in units of Planck's constant, half h, half h, half h. Okay, that is the unit of expressing spin. This is, of course, you know the size of the proton and electron. The sizes also depict what it is. Okay, each one. What is the proton size, neutron, and electron relative to each other. So these are the properties of subatomic particles. Now, the question is, what is the spin? How do we understand spin classically? Spin, remember, spin is a quantum mechanical concept. There is no good classical analogy. There is no analogy at all, classical analogy. It is generally, we all study, we would have been taught by in our early days of school. It is produced by the rotation of the particles, like it undergoes rotation clockwise, anti-clockwise. Varieties of theories have been given to make us understand. It's okay those days to get some ideas. But literally, it is not produced by the rotation of the particle. It is an intrinsic property of the particle. It is always there, even at 0K. Even at 0 degree Kelvin, it is there. It is an intrinsic property of the particle. If I say proton has spin half, it is there. That's all. It is a nature's property. Nature has given to us. We cannot question why. It is an intrinsic property. Okay. Then question is, if you say it is not produced by the rotation of the particle, of course, conceptually we keep using this, class rotating about its own axis, precision, etc. But in principle, though I said it is not produced by the rotation of the particles, then the question is why it is called a spin. What do you mean by a spin? Why it is called a spin? Remember, it is described with the equations treating angular momentum. Because I said all the rotating particles, I gave you an example, rotating objects possess angular momentum. This fundamental subatomic particles like protons, neutrons, and electrons are described by equations governing the angular momentum, the spins of them. That is why it is called a spin. And it is a vector quantity. It is a vector. It has direction and magnitude. Okay, all these properties can be described by equations governing angular momentum. Now, let us see. We know the subatomic particle properties of spin and charge. Let us consider the spin of a nucleus. Nucleus as a whole. Then we should know what are present what are the subatomic particles present inside the nucleus? The spins of the individual nucleons which are present inside the nucleus, they are nothing but protons and neutrons, which are collectively called nucleons. These protons and neutrons, which are present inside the nucleus, they combine to give an overall spin of the nucleus. Remember, they combine in such a way, they align in a particular manner, so that whole nucleus as such will get a spin. That is, overall spin will be given for the nucleus. This is called spin quantum number I of the nucleus. Now, to make it understand, let us go further. The question let us ask, do all nuclei of all the elements or isotopes of elements possess spin? Now, there is a general empirical rule to predict NMR activity of a nuclear spin. And you can find out whether a given nucleus or given isotope or a given element has a spin or not. And then you can also say whether it is NMR active or not. Remember, we have several information given in this, several parameters are mentioned here in this table containing 5 columns and 4 rows. Let us look at second row. Here in the first column, we are discussing about atomic mass, then atomic number, and few examples of the nuclei possessing these properties. Then we can say what is the total nuclear spin. Finally, based on this, we know whether it is NMR, whether such nuclei are NMR active or not. Take for example, if the atomic mass is odd number, atomic number is odd or even number, there are examples like that, like proton, carbon 13, which is an isotope of carbon, nitrogen 15, again an isotope of nitrogen, phosphorus 31. Look, in all these molecules, all these nuclei which have given examples, atomic mass is an odd number, 1, 13, 15 and 31. No matter what is their atomic number, atomic mass is odd number. Atomic number could be even or odd. See, it is even, is odd, doesn't matter. So long as atomic mass is odd number, we can say such nuclei have the total nuclear spin angular momentum or the spin of such nuclei are always in half integers. That means the spin value of such nuclei of such elements or such isotopes are half integers, like half, 3/2, 5/2, etc. In the last column, I am mentioning whether such nuclei are NMR active or not. Now I say such nuclei are NMR active. They are all NMR active nuclei. Look at the next row. Atomic mass is even, atomic number is odd. There are examples like nitrogen 14, isotope of nitrogen, deuterium, isotope of hydrogen, and boron, another isotope of boron. Look, all these nuclei have their atomic mass even number, 14, 2 and 10, whereas the atomic numbers are odd, 7, 1 and 5. Such nuclei will have the total nuclear spin always in integers, like 1, 3. There are integer numbers. And are they NMR active? Yes. Such nuclei are also NMR active. Go to the last situation where atomic mass is even number, atomic number is even. For example, carbon 12, isotope of carbon. oxygen 18, sulfur 32. Atomic mass is even, atomic number is even, again even, even. Such nuclei will have the total nuclear spin 0, and they are not NMR active. They are NMR inactive nuclei. Remember, what do you understand from this table? Given any element in the periodic table, whatever may be the isotope which after that you find out, just by looking at their atomic mass and atomic number, you can find out the spin of that nuclei, whether they are half integer spins or integer spins, or whether the spin is 0. Depending on that, you can say whatever may be the spin, whether it is half integers or integers, if they have spin, such nuclei will be NMR active. Nuclei with spin angular momentum 0 are NMR inactive. This is the table which can tell you how to calculate the spin of the nuclei, how to find out empirically based on atomic mass and atomic number, and then you will know whether such nuclei are NMR active or not. Okay, so next we can ask a question. How do I know they are spin half and spin 3/2? This is an empirical way. But there is, you can find out how the nuclear spins get assembled themselves, how the protons get assembled themselves, or how the neutrons get aligned themselves within the nucleus. From that, we can even work out what is the spin of different nuclei. So what I will do is I will stop today. We will continue from this point tomorrow.